Your retirement's biggest threat isn't the stock market. It's parked in your driveway. It's hanging on your wall. It might even be the business you spent 30 years building. There are 5 of these. And the 5th one isn't even a thing. It's a mindset. It might be the most expensive item on this entire list, but we're not starting there. And we're not starting with number 3 either. That's the one that quietly gets even the smartest planners. We'll get to it. We're starting with the one that fools almost every retiree first, the house you spent your whole life paying off. Here's a number that surprises most people. For the average pre-retiree, the home isn't just their biggest asset. It's over half of everything they own, and it produces $0 of income. Think about that for a second. Half your net worth sitting in a building, generating nothing, while quietly asking you for money every single month. Let me introduce you to the Smiths, a real situation, one that plays out in millions of households every year. The Smiths owned their home outright, paid off, no mortgage, worth about $600,000. On paper, that looks like security. That looks like we made it. But the house was costing them close to $19,000 a year. Property taxes, insurance, repairs, utilities for rooms nobody used anymore. 2 of their 3 kids' bedrooms had been empty for over a decade, so they downsized. Moved into a townhome worth $350,000. That single decision unlocked $250,000 in equity. And once you factor in the lower carrying costs, it created a swing of roughly $20,000 a year in their favor. $20,000 every year, just from letting go of square footage they weren't using. Now, here's a story that hits differently. In the comments of a video like this one, a woman once wrote about her mother, Margaret, a widow, alone in a 4-bedroom house. Her husband had always maintained mowing, gutters, the roof, the furnace. All of it now fell on Margaret, living by herself in a home built for a family of 5. That's not security. That's a burden wearing a security costume. So why do so many people hold on anyway, even when the math doesn't work? This is where it gets interesting psychologically. Behavioral economists call it the endowment effect, a concept from Kahneman and Thaler. In plain terms, we don't value the things we own at what they're actually worth. We value them at what they mean to us. The house isn't a house. It's the nursery. It's Thanksgiving. It's every birthday party that ever happened in that backyard. There's also something researchers call status quo bias. The pull toward doing nothing simply because doing nothing feels safer than doing something, even when doing nothing is the more expensive choice. And underneath both of those is something even deeper, identity. For a lot of people, this house isn't just where they raise their kids. It's the proof that they raised their kids. Let go of the house. And some part of them worries they're letting go of that identity too. That's exactly why this decision feels so much harder than a spreadsheet would suggest. And the spreadsheet is blunter than you'd think. Home equity is the single largest share of net worth for most Americans heading into retirement, according to Federal Reserve data. Maintenance alone, before taxes or insurance, typically runs 1 to 4% of a home's value every year. On a $600,000 home, that's up to $24,000 a year just to keep the place standing. Here's the part that should actually change your mind, though. Research from Merrill Lynch and AgeWave found that most retirees who downsize don't regret it. They report higher satisfaction afterward, not because they own less, because they're carrying less. Now, I know some people love staying in the family home. And aging in place can be exactly the right call if the home genuinely suits it and the finances support it without strain. This isn't a rule for everyone. But let's be honest about the reason people usually give for staying. The grandkids need the space when they visit. Fair enough. So ask yourself, how many nights a year does that actually happen? 10? 20? Compare that to 365 nights a year of paying to heat, cool, insure, and maintain rooms that sit empty the other 345 days. That's not a judgment. That's just the math, finally getting a chance to speak. So here's the practical takeaway before you make any decision out of pure habit. Run the real numbers. What is this home actually costing you every year? Taxes, insurance, upkeep, all of it. And what could that trapped equity generate if it were invested instead, working for you rather than the other way around? You don't have to decide today, but you do have to actually look. Because here's the thing. As emotional as this one is, it's not even the most emotional item on the list. The next one seems small. It's sitting right outside your front door, and it's quietly draining thousands of dollars a year, while almost nobody notices it happening. AA puts the full cost of owning a single vehicle at close to $12,000 a year once you count the loan, insurance, gas, maintenance, and depreciation. Now double that. Because most households heading into retirement are still running 2 cars, sometimes 3, built around a life that doesn't exist anymore. Here's the problem. Those extra cars were never really about transportation. They were about a commute. One to the office, one to the kids' school, one for the spouse's separate schedule. Take away the 9 to 5, and half that fleet is just sitting there depreciating in the driveway. Let's talk about David and Lisa, a couple who actually ran the numbers. 2 working professionals, 2 cars, 2 commutes. The day Lisa retired, the second of the 2 to leave her job, they sat down and asked a simple question. How often do we actually need to be in 2 places at once now? The honest answer was maybe twice a month. So they sold 1 car, kept a newer one, used a ride share for the rare overlap. Total savings, about $4,000 a year without giving up a single trip they actually needed to take. Now compare that to a different kind of story, a Robert, a man who kept his old pickup truck just in case. He used it maybe 5 times a year, hauling mulch or helping a friend move a couch. The rest of the time, it sat in the driveway, insured, registered, slowly losing value. Robert was paying roughly $800 a year to insure what was functionally a very expensive lawn ornament. So why does this one feel so hard to let go of, even when the math is this obvious? Because a car isn't just a car. It's independence. It's the ability to leave the house whenever you want, without asking anyone, without waiting on anyone. For a lot of people, this side, especially men, research suggests giving up a vehicle feels less like a budgeting decision and more like an admission that they're getting older. That's not vanity. That's identity. The same way the house was identity in the last section. Different object, same trap. And here's the part that makes this one sting a little more than the house does. A house can appreciate. A car never does. From the moment you drive it off the lot, it's a guaranteed loss, ticking down in value every single year, whether you drive it or not. Add insurance, registration, and the surprise repair bill that always seems to land the same month as something else. And what you're really looking at is a phantom cost, money leaving your account for an asset that's actively working against you. Now, to be fair, this isn't true for everyone. If you live somewhere rural without reliable rideshare or public transit, 2 vehicles might genuinely be a necessity, not a habit. Geography matters here more than almost anywhere else on this list. This isn't a blanket rule, and it was never meant to be. But for most retirees living in or near a town or city, the question is worth asking honestly. How many times a year does that second car actually save you from an inconvenience versus how many months a year it quietly costs you money just for existing? Here's the practical version of that question. Add up what each vehicle actually costs you annually, payment or not, insurance, gas, maintenance, depreciation. Then track, honestly, how many times a month you'd actually need both cars at the same time. If a $30 ride share covers that a few times a month, you've just found a few $1,000s a year you didn't know you were losing. That's the visible stuff. The house, the car, sitting right out in the open where anyone could see them if they looked closely enough. The next one is invisible. It's not parked in your driveway or listed on a deed. It's hiding inside your own portfolio statements in the fine print most people never read. And it might be the single most expensive item on this entire list, spread out quietly over 20 or 30 years. Let's start with a number that tends to catch people off guard. Roughly 85 to 95% of actively managed funds fail to beat their own benchmark over a 20-year stretch. Not a bad year, not a rough quarter, 2 decades. Meaning the fund you've been paying extra for, the one your advisor said would beat the market, almost certainly hasn't. Here's a story that plays out more often than you'd think. A woman, we'll call her Diane because this happens to a lot of Dianes, spent 20 years contributing to a whole life insurance policy her advisor recommended in her 30s. It felt responsible. It felt like she was doing the smart thing. Only years later, reviewing her retirement numbers with a fee-only planner, did Diane realize the policy's internal costs had quietly eaten a huge share of her growth, money that in a simple, low-cost index fund would have compounded into real retirement income. She wasn't foolish. She was never shown the comparison. That's the thing about this category. Nobody sits you down and shows you both paths side by side. You just see one option presented with confidence and you sign. So why does this keep happening decade after decade to smart, careful people? 2 reasons, and they work together. The first is what behavioral economists call action bias, the feeling that paying more for something must mean you're doing more to protect yourself. A higher fee feels like extra armor even when it isn't. The second is sunk cost thinking. Once you've paid into a policy for 15 or 20 years, walking away feels like admitting all those payments were wasted. So people keep feeding something that's already underperforming just to avoid that feeling. Now let's put a real number on this because the abstract version doesn't hit the same way the math does. A 1% difference in fees might sound small enough to ignore. On a $500,000 portfolio over 20 to 30 years, that 1% can quietly cost you somewhere in the neighborhood of $7,000 a year in lost growth. Money that simply vanishes into someone else's revenue line instead of your retirement income. $7,000 every year for a difference most people never even noticed was there. Now, to be fair, not every financial product is bad and not every advisor is trying to sell you something. There's a real difference between a fee-only fiduciary who's legally required to act in your interest and a product salesperson whose paycheck depends on which policy you choose. Plenty of advisors fall firmly into the first category, and this isn't an attack on the profession. The goal here isn't fire your advisor. It's understanding clearly what you're actually paying for and whether it's earning its keep. So here's the practical version of this one. Ask directly, what is my all-in fee across every account and every product? And what would a comparable low-cost index option cost instead? If nobody's ever walked you through that comparison, that's worth noticing on its own. 4 things down: the house, the car, and now the fees hiding in your statements. But the next one isn't something you can sell in a weekend with a phone call. It took decades to build, and that's exactly why letting go of it might be the hardest decision on this entire list. Here's a number that should stop you. More than 75% of small business owners say they plan to exit within the next 10 years. Less than 10% of them have an actual written succession plan. And for most of these owners, 80 to 90% of their entire net worth is sitting inside that one business. Illiquid, untouchable, impossible to spend at the grocery store. Read that again. Not some of their net worth, not a big chunk, almost all of it. One asset, one basket, and no real plan for what happens the day they stop showing up. Now compare that to a story most people already know without realizing it's a retirement lesson. Ray Kroc didn't build McDonald's to need Ray Kroc. He built systems, processes, training manuals, and a machine that could run whether he was in the room or not. That's the entire difference between a business that's actually an asset and a business that's just a job with extra steps. One can be sold. The other only exists as long as the owner keeps showing up to hold it together. Most small business owners never make that shift. And it's not because they're careless. It's because of something psychologists sometimes call my baby syndrome. The business isn't a spreadsheet to them. It's a child they raised from nothing. You don't sell your kid just because the math says so. There's a second layer underneath that, and it's quieter. Fear of irrelevance. If the business disappears, who are you at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday? For decades, the answer was obvious. The phone rang. There were decisions to make. People needed you. Take that away. And some owners aren't just losing income. They're losing the entire structure of their day and a piece of how they see themselves. Here's where it gets financially dangerous, though. Research from Securian found that most business owners believe their company is worth significantly more than what the market will actually pay for it. Not a small gap, a real one. And selling a business isn't like selling a car. It typically takes 1 to 2 years from decision to close deal, sometimes longer, which means if you wait until the year you want to retire to start thinking about this, you've probably already waited too long. Now, to be fair, there are absolutely situations where keeping the business or passing it down to family is exactly the right call. But that decision deserves an honest answer to 2 questions. Do the kids actually want it? And are they genuinely qualified to run it? Not just willing to inherit it? Here's a nuance worth sitting with. A lot of owners try to soften the exit by staying on as a silent partner, 1 foot out the door, 1 foot still in. In practice, this tends to backfire more often than it helps. Employees don't know who's really in charge. Family members feel watched instead of trusted. A clean, defined transition, hard as it sounds, usually serves both the business and the family better than a slow, half-finished goodbye. So here's the practical version of this one. If you own a business and retirement is anywhere on your horizon, succession planning isn't something you start the year you leave. It's something you train for, the same way you'd train for a specific event. Years of preparation, not a decision made the morning of. 4 things down: the house, the car, the hidden fees, the business built entirely around one person. But here's the twist. The 5th thing on this list isn't a thing you own at all. You can't list it on a deed, you can't trade it in, and you definitely can't sell it in an estate sale. And it might be quietly costing you more than the other 4 combined. It's the need to keep up. Here's what that actually looks like in retirement. Kevin retires early, genuinely early, on his own terms, fully funded. He drives a 10-year-old Honda. Meanwhile, 2 of his old co-workers, still grinding away at the same jobs he left, are pulling into the office parking lot in brand new BMWs. So, who's actually richer? It's not a trick question. It's the entire point. Kevin is, by a wide margin. But if you only looked at the driveway, you'd guess wrong every time. There's a reason that mistake feels so natural to make. Psychologists call it social comparison theory, a concept from Leon Festinger back in the 1950s. We don't measure our lives against some fixed objective standard. We measure them against the people closest to us, the neighbor, the old coworker, the sibling with the bigger house. It's not really the car we're reacting to. It's the story we imagine that car is telling about us. And even when people do chase the upgrade and the new car, the bigger boat, the nicer country club, something strange happens. The happiness never sticks. Researchers call this the hedonic treadmill. You buy the thing, you feel great for a few weeks, and then your baseline quietly resets. You're right back where you started, except now you're paying a monthly payment for the privilege of feeling normal again. There's actual lottery research on this, and it's kind of unsettling. People who win huge jackpots report roughly the same long-term happiness as people who didn't win anything at all. Sometimes lower, once the new stress of managing that money kicks in. The spike is real. It just doesn't last. Compare that to research from Dr. Thomas Gilovich at Cornell, who spent decades studying this exact question. What actually makes people happy, stuff, or experiences? Experiences win consistently and by a wide margin. A trip with your spouse, a weekend with your grandkids, those memories keep paying emotional dividends for years. A new BMW starts losing value the moment you drive it off the lot. And so does the feeling that came with it. And here's something that might surprise you. This isn't a new problem created by social media. The phrase keeping up with the Joneses is over 100 years old. It came from a comic strip in 1913, which means this isn't a modern glitch in human psychology, and it's just human psychology, and social media only turned the volume up. Now, to be fair, this isn't about minimalism. Some people genuinely love nice things. And there's nothing wrong with that. If a boat brings you real lasting joy every single time you're on the water, that's not the problem this section is describing. The problem is spending to compete, rather than spending to align with what you actually value. That's the nuance worth sitting with. As author Ramit Sethi puts it, spend extravagantly on the things you love and cut mercilessly on the things you don't. The goal was never to want less. It's to want on purpose instead of by accident. So here's the practical version of this one, and it might be the single most useful question on this entire list. Before any major retirement purchase, ask yourself honestly, am I buying this for me or for an audience? Because underneath the house, the car, the fees, and the business, every single one of those decisions was quietly being influenced by the same belief. That more visible success equals more real success. That bigger, by default, means safer. It doesn't. So if these 5 things were never really about the stuff itself, what were they actually about? Look back at the list for a second. The house, the car, the fees hiding in your statements, the business built around one person, and underneath all of it, the quiet need to keep up. Different objects, same story, told 5 different ways. Every single one of them was really about identity, about who you are when you're not the guy with the paid-off house or the couple with the successful business or the person who never needed to downsize. Take the object away. And for a lot of people, there's a moment of, wait, who am I without it? That question is uncomfortable. It's also exactly where freedom starts. Here's the reframe worth sitting with. None of this was ever about telling you to own less for its own sake. Simplicity isn't the goal. Cash flow is. Flexibility is. The ability to wake up on a random Tuesday in retirement and actually enjoy it instead of quietly managing 5 different obligations disguised as assets. Selling the right things at the right time isn't giving something up. It's buying something back. Years of your life you'd otherwise spend maintaining, insuring, managing, and worrying about things that stopped serving you a long time ago. And to be clear, this was never a call to sell everything on this list. Maybe none of it applies fully to you. Maybe only one item does. That's fine. That's actually the point. You don't need to overhaul your entire life this weekend. You need to pick one, just one. The house, the car, the portfolio, the business, or the mindset underneath all 4, and actually run the numbers on it this month. That's it. That's the whole ask. Because here's what nobody tells you about retirement planning. It's rarely one big decision that determines whether the next 30 years feel calm or chaotic. It's a handful of smaller ones made a little earlier than feels comfortable, while you still have options instead of being forced into them. You still have time. That's not a consolation prize. That's the entire advantage. Now, knowing all 5 of these, there's still one question we haven't answered. Out of everything on this list, which one actually costs retirees the most on average? Not the scariest, not the most emotional. The one number that, when you see it, changes how you rank all 5. Okay, let's actually answer it. Out of everything on this list, the house, the car, the business, the mindset, and the fees, which one costs retirees the most on average? Most people guess the house. It's the biggest number on paper, so it feels like the obvious answer. Some guess the business because losing decades of work sounds like the heaviest loss. Both are reasonable guesses. Both are wrong. It's the fees, and it's not close. Here's why the ranking surprises people. When we looked at the fee gap earlier, we used a simple number, about $7,000 a year lost on a $500,000 portfolio from a 1% difference in cost. That number is real, but it's also misleading because it only shows you 1 year. Fees don't cost you 1 year. They cost you every year, compounding against you the entire time you're invested. Run that same 1% gap out over 25 or 30 years, the actual timeline for most people's investing life, and that small annual number turns into something closer to $250,000 to $300,000 in lost growth, not spent, not stolen in a single moment, just quietly uncompounded year after year in a way that never shows up as a single painful transaction on a statement. That's the part that makes this one dangerous. The house costs you visibly. A repair bill, a tax notice, something that lands in your inbox and makes you wince. The fee gap never does that. It just makes your future account balance smaller than it should have been. And there's no invoice for the difference. You never see what didn't happen. Remember Diane from a few sections back? Here's the number she actually saw. Once her fee-only planner ran the full comparison for her, the whole life policy she'd paid into for 2 decades versus a simple low-cost index fund over that same stretch wasn't a $7,000 gap. It was closer to $180,000 by the time she was looking at retiring. That's not a rounding error. That's a car paid for in cash, disappearing every few years for 2 decades. And she never once felt it happen. There's a name for why this one sneaks past almost everyone. Exponential growth bias. Our brains are wired to think in straight lines. 1% a year sounds small, so it must stay small. Compounding doesn't work that way. It accelerates quietly in the background, and by the time the gap is large enough to notice without a spreadsheet, most of the damage is already 20 years old. To be fair, this doesn't mean every retiree is sitting on a 6-figure loss. If your portfolio is $50,000 instead of $500,000, the dollar figure shrinks, but the percentage doesn't. The lesson isn't panic about your fees. It's know your fees, because this is the one item on the list where the cost is largest, precisely because it's the easiest one to ignore. So here's the practical version. One more time, worth repeating now that you know the scale of it. Pull your statements, find your actual all-in cost, and run it forward 20 or 30 years, not one. That single calculation, 5 minutes with a compounding calculator, will tell you more about your retirement than almost anything else on this list. Now you know the ranking. You know the number. So the only question left is the one that actually matters. Not which of these 5 things is worse, but which one is yours and what you're going to do about it before the year runs out.